Hey, I'm Vicar Ross. I'm here on a Stump. But the real question is, was I stumped by your questions this week? If you have a question and you want to try and stump me, put it in my email right there or in the box at church. And don't forget to like and share these videos. You never know, we might have the same questions that you do. Today we're talking about the mind and the decisions of God. We have two stories, and the question essentially is, why does God judge someone pretty harshly and reprimand them in one case, but not judge them and reprimand them in another case, where they both break God's desire, they go against his will? The first man is Moses, the leader of the people of Israel out of slavery to the promised land. He strikes a rock one time in frustration when God told him to speak to it, and he is no longer allowed to enter into the promised land. But then on the other hand, in the book of Judges, we hear about a man named Micah who creates an idol out of silver, dedicates it to the Lord, creates like this whole shrine and temple in his house to it, and even hires a Levite to be the priest or the supervisor of that shrine, going against what God has commanded us in the first commandments. But we don't hear that God judges or reprimands Micah whatsoever. Well, I think there are two things we can look at. And while I don't know exactly why God does what he does, there are two things that are different from these stories. First off, Moses was the leader of all of Israel. He was the one who was supposed to be the example for them to follow, the one who leads them. And God is clear that those who he has put into a position of leadership, he holds to a higher standard than others. Whereas Micah was not the leader of the people of Israel, he was simply an Israelite, and he was not a king or anything like that. The second thing is, what is the purpose of these accounts? The book of Judges kind of goes like this, a downward spiral. The people of Israel will follow God for a short time after the judges free them from captivity or their oppressors, and then they go their own way. Even in Judges chapter 17, where we read about Micah, we read in verse 6 that there was no king over Israel, and everyone did as they saw fit. And this story of Micah is simply an example of everyone doing as they see fit. A continuation of that downward spiral. God eventually would give Israel a king. Eventually they would go into exile. We know the rest of the history from there as Jesus would come. But the story of Micah is there to show us how people were going against the Lord and not following him. And so God didn't bring his judgment specifically on Micah. Later on, he surely would bring it on to the people of Israel, though. So those, I think, are the two big differences from these two stories. If you have any other questions, please submit them to me. And I pray that the Lord will bless you and keep you today, tomorrow, and always. And we'll see you next week at Stump. Hear you.